Last week we talked about how the Christian life is active, not passive. A Christian is not characterized by what they do. A Christian is not characterized by what they do not do. They are characterized by what they do. And I'd like for us to talk more about that today. For our gospel reading, we heard what is known as the illustration of the sheep and the goats. It is commonly interpreted as an illustration of the last judgment. People are gathered in front of Jesus. They are divided into two groups. One group goes to a reward. The other group goes to horrible punishment. The criteria by which people are separated out are whether they fed the hungry, gave drink to the thirsty, took in the strangers, clothed the naked, and visited the sick and the prisoners. Those are the only criteria. Now this has caused more than a little bit of consternation in Christianity from the very beginning. And this is the reason this passage is probably one of the most ignored passages in the entire New Testament. Think for a minute, it's the last judgment. People are going to be separated out for all eternity. And the criteria by which they are separated out has nothing to do with what we normally think of as sins. There's nothing in there about sex, drunkenness, gambling, playing cards. There's nothing even in there about burglary or murder. The only criteria by which people are separated out is whether they fed the hungry, gave drink to the thirsty, clothed the naked, took in the strangers, and visited the sick and prisoners. Now, obviously, this is not the only passage in the New Testament that deals with the last judgment, or that deals by the criteria which our lives are measured. But this does come straight from the mouth of Jesus. And for that reason, we have to give it a lot of weight. So obviously then, we can say it is very important to Jesus whether or not we feed the hungry, clothe the naked, take in the strangers, and visit the sick and prisoners. In fact, it seems to be of supreme importance to Jesus. This is not the only place in the Gospels we hear Jesus saying something like this. In another place, he tells us to give anybody whatever they want from us. In another place, he tells us if somebody comes and wants to borrow something from us, we are to lend it to them, even if we know they can't pay us back. Jesus tells this young man who comes to him one day and says, "What do I have to do to inherit the eternal life?" And Jesus said, "Follow the commandments." And he said, "I've done that since my youth." And Jesus said, "You lack one thing. Sell what you have and give to the poor, and come and follow me." Moving out of the Gospels through the rest of the New Testament, we see similar things. From the book of James, we hear this: "If a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you says to them, 'Depart in peace, be warmed and filled,' but you do not give them the things they need for the body, what does it profit?" Now these things are disturbing. And they have been disturbing ever since the beginning of Christianity. Now back during December, one Sunday, our study was on the Magnificat and the Virgin Mary. Remember, that's what the Virgin Mary said when she went to visit her cousin Elizabeth. And we saw how it talks about the mighty being knocked off their thrones, the lowly being exalted. It talks about the hungry being filled with good things. And ominously, it talks about the rich being sent away empty. Now that very Sunday, after church, as some of us were standing down there on the sidewalk, a man walked up. He was wearing a large backpack. He was apparently homeless. He said he was trying to get to some other state where his sister lives because she has cancer. On that day, he was just trying to get to Rutherford. He said someone had given him some money with which he had bought some food that he had in that backpack. Now, he did not ask us for anything. He just asked if we would pray with him, which we did, and then he went on his way. Now, I really felt bad about that after this man left, and I know some of you did too. What could we have done? We certainly could have bought him a ticket to where he was going. I think anyone out there had the money to buy that ticket if they wanted to. We could have given him money for food or something, but we didn't. We did what he asked. We prayed with him. But on the way home, that passage from James came to my mind. If a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you says to them, "Depart in peace, be warmed and filled," but you do not give them the things which are needed for the body, what does it profit? I always feel conflicted in situations like that. You know, there are people that beg for money that are just scam artists, but there are people who beg for money that are truly needy. And so I tried to rationalize this in my mind. I said, you know, if we had given him money for food, or even if we had bought him a ticket, that would not have changed anything about his situation. It wouldn't have changed anything at all about his situation. His situation would still be the same. I don't think there's any of us in here who would see someone like that and not want to help them. But nothing that we could do, really, would change anything major in his life. And so I guess we could comfort ourselves with that knowledge. But then I look in the Gospels, and I see that nowhere in the Gospel, and I mean nowhere, does Jesus tell us to go out and try to change the structure of society to help the poor. He never tells us to do that. Nowhere does Jesus tell us to get involved in politics or anything like that, or lobby on behalf of the poor. He never tells us to change the societal structures that lead to people being poor and homeless. He never does that. Never even hints at it. But he does say, feed them, clothe them, take them in. He never tells us to address the societal structures that lead to poverty and homelessness. He only tells us to meet the need. But when you think about it, that's an open-ended commandment that you can never fulfill. There are homeless people all over Shelby. There's poor people all over Cleveland County. There's people around us that live in homes without heat or running water. And the only power they have comes from a drop cord from another house. There are people who rarely have enough to eat. I went to a house one time, and these two men were there. They had worked all day long. And all they were going to have for supper, the only thing they had to eat, they had 3 ears of corn boiled in a pot. And that's all they were going to have for supper, between the two of them. 3 ears of corn. I know people who don't have coats in the winter. I know people who wanted to try to work outside during the day in the summertime. They didn't even have a hat to wear. There are people who can't get a job because they can't afford a car, but yet they live in an area where without a car, there's no way they can get back to work every day. There's so much need in Shelby. So much need in Cleveland County that we could never hope to meet it. We could give away every dime we have and become poor and homeless ourselves, and it wouldn't be a drop in the bucket. So what do? Do we reduce ourselves to poverty and give away everything, and then look back and see that it didn't make a dent in the situation? I think about things like that, and I think about them often. On Christmas Day, after we got through eating lunch, I said to Wanda, you know, it's sinful to have a lunch like we used to have. Now granted, Wanda and I are not the best cooks in the world, but we're not bad. And I will say that our food is pretty good. And we had a really good Christmas lunch. And of course, during Christmas, it was so cold that we just went and turned the heat up, you know. There's a lot of people that can't do that. They either don't have heat or they can't afford to pay for it, but I just went in and turned it up, you know. And then we sit down and we read about how Jesus talks about feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, taking in the strangers, lending to whomever wants to borrow from us. I will find something in the New Testament that will release me from that. And so I go to Matthew chapter 26. When Jesus was in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, a woman came to him having an alabaster flask of very costly oil. She poured it on his head as he sat at the table. When his disciples saw it, they were indignant and said, "Why this waste? This fragrant oil might have been sold for much and given to the poor." But Jesus turned and said to them, "Why do you trouble this woman? She has done a good work for me. For you have the poor with you always, but me you do not have always." Now in this passage, a woman comes in with some fragrant oil and she pours it on Jesus. And the disciples say, "That's a waste. This could have been sold and given to the poor." But Jesus said, "You have the poor with you always." But gosh, I don't think that passage gives us an out from what we're talking about today. This passage is about a specific incident, about a specific thing that happened. I don't think it's meant to lay down a general principle. And I'll be honest with you, there's nothing I can find in the New Testament that releases us from the emphasis Jesus put on helping others. There's nothing I can find in there that dilutes it at all. And it is one of the things that Wanda and I have wondered so much about this past year in 2022. Those passages seem to be the ones that jump out at us in our daily Bible reading. Now, I guess we might have our own opinions as to why stuff like this has basically been ignored in mainline Christianity. I don't know of any mainline Christian denomination that has ever really put an emphasis on that. It's something that organized Christianity, for the most part, has just skipped over. Now, individual Christians and various Christian groups have tried to take some of this seriously. That's where the soup kitchen movement and the homeless shelter movement partially stemmed from that. And those are all good things, and they are all meeting needs of people. But in general, Christians don't and have never thought of those as necessities. They've never thought, you have to have a homeless shelter, you have to have a soup kitchen. It's good if you do. They do good work, but it's not been a have to. And many Christians anyway don't feel that that is the particular avenue they want to go in. You know, when you read these things from Jesus, you can come to the realization that Jesus is wanting us to be willing to make sacrifices for other people. You know, that's basically what Jesus is saying. He's wanting us to be willing to give up certain things in order to help others. That's basically what he's asking. Jesus did not set standards for the numerical value of the number of people we have to help. He didn't say you have to help 10 people a month. Or I want you to help at least 150 people a year. He never said that. He never gave us the list about so we can say, well, I've helped my 10 people this month, I'm off the hook. Now, I'm going to suggest something here. And this is the way I have personally in my life chosen to deal with these passages. I'm not saying this is the way everybody should. And I'm not saying that this is the only way to do it. And I'm not saying this is what exactly Jesus meant. But what if you chose just one or two people and decided to help them out in a significant way to the point where it required sacrifice on your part? You don't have to go out and save the entire world. But what if you just choose one person and you help them in such a significant way that it causes you to have to give up something? Just one person. I was in a store back a number of years ago. There was a little plaque up there that said, instead of trying to mean something to the whole world, why not try to mean the world to one person? You know, if every Christian in the United States would take that to heart and do that, we would change the world. If every Christian in the United States would take, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to help one person to the point where it causes me to make a sacrifice, the whole face of the United States would change. If every Christian would do that. One person, helping one person, could change the whole face of society. I don't want us to look at helping others as doing a duty. I don't want us to look at that as because we're doing it because Jesus said we have to. And I'm just doing it to check the boxes so I can check off what Jesus said to do. It may be that Jesus wants us to do it from the heart. Maybe he doesn't want us to do it because he told us to, but simply because he wants us to. We want to. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, a man is beaten and left on the side of the road badly wounded. A priest walks by, circles around and does nothing. Another religious man walks by, circles around and does nothing. A Samaritan walks by and helps the man. And here's what it said. In some Bible translations, it's translated as, but the Samaritan had compassion on the man. Literally, that is, the Samaritan was moved to his spleen. And sometimes you'll see that translated as bowels, but it's literally spleen. And that was, in the ancient world, thought to be the seat of our compassion, our empathy for others. The way we would say it, we felt it in our gut. And so you see, the image is powerful. Here comes the Samaritan going by, and he sees the man laying there wounded, and he feels it in his gut to the point where he can't just walk by. And I guess this is what Jesus is trying to tell us we need to be like. The Samaritan did not help the wounded man because he had to, or because he wanted anything in return. He helped the wounded man because he felt it in his gut. And how could he not help it? We don't have a lot of love for others in our society today. It's something that our society does not cultivate. We are raising generations of children who have been taught the idea that it's all about me. The baby boomer generation has been called the me generation because that is called the generation of self-fulfillment. The children of the baby boomer generation have been called the me generation. It's the generation that was taught self-esteem above anything else. You're special. You're wonderful. And they took it to heart. The millennial generation is characterized by extreme narcissism. And a narcissist is characterized by an inflated sense of self-importance, a lack of concern for others, a need for excessive admiration, and the belief that you are unique and deserving of special treatment. Now that is an exact description of what's going on in our society today. You only have to look out at society and see that everywhere. People don't care about each other. They only care about that for themselves. Wanda and I have talked about this in driving home at night of 18. You won't believe the number of people that we meet with their lights on bright, and they will not dim them down. No concern for other people. None whatsoever. That's common human decency. They won't dim their lights. They don't care. And that's what our society is going for. They don't care. I'm not saying this is anything new. There's always been people like that, but it has never characterized our entire society the way it does today. Now, how it got to be this way might be open to debate, but I don't think any of us can disagree that our society is a me society. I think what Jesus was really getting at, with the emphasis on helping others, and he was trying to get us to cultivate caring and mercy for others. We have to somehow be able to step outside ourselves and see others as important. We can't make it all about ourselves, all about what I want, all about what I think. We have to choose to consider the other. But how do you do that? How do you cultivate concern for others? I have heard, I don't know whether this is true or not, but there is an opinion that action comes first and feeling will follow. Do it, act it, and eventually you will feel it. Now whether that's true or not, I do not know, but it seems worth a try. Do it, act it, and eventually you will feel it. Your actions will make the inside feelings eventually. Just do it, and the inside feelings will follow. And maybe that's what Jesus was trying to tell us. If you want to have empathy and concern and compassion for others, if you do not want to live in a me world, whether you feel it or not, just go out and do it. And if you do it enough, if you act it out enough, eventually you will internalize it. I sometimes think about what I once said at my funeral. Would I want a funeral where people talk about how much money I have? Talk about all my accomplishments in life? Or would I rather have a funeral where just one person stood up and said, I don't know what I would have done without him. He meant the world to me. That's the funeral I would choose. How would you rather be thrust into the presence of God? With all your money and all your accomplishments dragging along behind you? Or with God knowing that you sacrificed really sacrificed to just help one person. Which way do you think would be better?